Hello and welcome to Peace, the podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Peace, a United Methodist community in Shoreview, Minnesota. I'm Jason Steffenhagen, the lead pastor, and each episode will typically start with a sacred story reading coming from the Holy Scriptures, followed by the message that was given during our Sunday morning worship time. Any announcements for our community will come at the end of each episode, so stick around. If you are curious about learning more about Peace, United Methodist Community, you can go to peaceumc.com. Again, that's peaceumc.com. If you would like to find more episodes, you can find them on our website or go to our show page, which is peacethepodcast.podbean.com. Once again, that's peacethepodcast.podbean.com. We hope that you enjoy this episode. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. And now, on to the sacred story reading. Our sacred story reading comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, towards the end with verses 30 through 31. And for any of you who have seen the movie, that's the highlight for this week. Remember the Titans. You might remember some of these lines. Here's how it goes. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. If you are a football fan, this is your time of year. If you are someone who has great anticipation for what the football season may hold, you are probably having the time of your life, because August for football, this time of year is everything, because training camp has started, preseason games are going on, rosters are being developed, players are getting to know each other. They're building chemistry. They're working hard. They got all these cool stories coming out from reporters who are on the sidelines or at practice, talking about camaraderie, talking about who looks good this year, talking about the new coaching staff and the different plays they're putting in, the blitz packages, the coverages in the secondary. They're talking about new formations and people coming out of the slot and going wide and all this crazy stuff about blocking schemes and free agent signings and who's looking good and the young rookies. It is a smorgasbord of fun for football fans right now. You layer in all the fantasy football stuff and drafts coming up, and it just gets exponentially more and more fun. And here's the best part. Right now, you got hope. You got hope that your team can win. I know it's all going to get dashed for Vikings fans when we lose to the Packers on week 1, but at least right now we have a little hope. And that's what's exciting about August and football, is that there's so much hope. One of the things I love about the movie Remember the Titans is that they go to their training camp. They go away to this college and they spend time practicing and working and getting to know each other. And if you didn't get a chance to see the movie, this movie depicts a football team in the South during the 60s at a time when schools were slowly becoming integrated, because at the time the Jim Crow South had segregated schools, black schools and white schools, and they were integrating them. And this school that's highlighted in this movie was an integrated school, and Coach Boone, played by Denzel Washington, is brought on to be a part of the football coaching staff and is eventually raised up to be the head coach. And so he's tasked with trying to bring this team together, trying to help them work together as a unit. And so they go away to training camp, and of course it all is going to fall apart. There's division, there's rivalry, there's frustration, there's hatred, and he's got to figure out a way to bring these guys together. And some of the best parts of the movie are as they navigate the complexities of coming together as a team and learning how to understand each other and to know each other. One of my favorite authors of basically any book I've ever read, is Bryan Stevenson. Bryan Stevenson is the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and he wrote a book called Just Mercy, and then he's done a number of talks around the country. And during his talk, he has four kind of core principles that he shares when it comes to how do we make meaningful change in our world, especially regarding racial reconciliation, but including all forms of change, but primarily racial reconciliation. And I think Remember the Titans captures these ideas incredibly well. So here are the four things, and I'm going to minimize these. I highly recommend looking up Bryan Stevenson, reading his book, watching the YouTube, supporting the work that he does. But here are the four things. Number one is get proximate. You got to get close. You got to get near. You got to rub shoulders. You got to rub off on each other. And of course, that's what's happening at this training camp in Remember the Titans. They are literally rooming with people that are from a different racial and ethnic background than each other. And so they are forced into proximity. The second thing is that you have to change the narrative. In order to make meaningful change in the world, you got to start changing the underlying narratives. Those underlying narratives are that often the people from the other group are to be feared. The people from the other group are going to take away your power and privileges. The people from the other group are coming after you. They're going to replace you. They're going to hinder your advancement. And oftentimes those narratives are just flat out wrong. They're not based in fact. They're not based in reality. And they are used as fear-mongering tactics in order to drive wedges between people. We see this all the time in our current political structure. We see this all the time when it comes to the way people interact on social media. And so we need to change the underlying narratives that impact how we see each other. The third thing is that we got to stay hopeful. We got to stay hopeful because there's going to be setbacks. There's going to be injustices that happen. There's going to be times where it seems like we're taking 3 steps forward, but suddenly we get driven backwards. It's like running into that offensive line where you're trying to get to the quarterback, but man, they all are just pushing you back. And we got to stay hopeful that we can keep advancing. We got to stay hopeful that we actually will overcome some of the injustices that we are seeing. And so you have to stay positive, stay hopeful, stay optimistic. You have to stay hopeful. And what's neat about Remember the Titans is that not only do they get proximate, but they start to change the narratives about each other. And then when there's setbacks, they commit to staying hopeful. And then finally, the fourth thing that Bryan Stevenson encourages is that you have to do uncomfortable things. You got to do things that are uncomfortable. You got to put yourself out there. You got to, like I said, rub shoulders, get proximate. You got to change narrative, stay hopeful, and then do things that are hard. One of my favorite parts of the movie is when the players come back from training camp and they've come together as a team. They've broken down some of these barriers that they've had. They've figured out how to be a team, how to come together, how to trust each other, how to change narratives. They are hopeful for the season. They've been close to each other, and yet they walk back into a community that's not ready for that. They walk into a community that is still segregated, still divided. And although they've come together, they now have to do an uncomfortable thing and model that to the rest of the community. Because it would be easy to go back to their silos, go back to their comfortable spaces. All the white players over here, all the black players over here, all the white players associating with all the white students in the school, and all the black players associating with only the black students in the school. But instead, they have to do an uncomfortable thing and continue leaning into the relationships they've developed. I think this movie is such a beautiful example of how this can happen. And yet, sometimes a failure of this movie is that we can just settle on, isn't it so great that we've progressed this far? Isn't it so great that this football team came together? When there's systemic changes that are needed, there's systemic flaws that still exist, that we have much work to do. When it comes to the civil rights movement and it comes to this work of racial reconciliation, I think Isaiah chapter 40, which I read a portion of a few minutes ago, is one of the quintessential chapters of the Bible that really leans into why the civil rights movement is so important. And this is one of the chapters that was probably utilized to help further an understanding of what to do. So we're going to get nerdy for a minute. Okay, so buckle up for a little bit of a nerd session when it comes to understanding Isaiah chapter 40. So Isaiah is a complicated book of the Bible. Isaiah is a prophetic book where it's warning the people, it's warning leadership about what's going to happen. But there's an interesting part of how scholars understand the book of Isaiah, because they believe that the first 39 chapters of Isaiah were written during the 8th century before the Babylonian exile. So you got to remember, there's an entire history of time where there was a king in Israel. It starts with Saul and then David and Solomon. Then the kingdom gets divided north and south, and they continue on with the lines of kings. The Assyrians are going to come in the 700s and conquer the northern tribes. And then the Babylonians in 586 are going to capture the southern tribes. So they think that Isaiah is probably writing around the time of the 700s, and he's warning the people about what will happen. Like, hey, this is about to get really bad. This is not going to go well. You need to do something. And then there's a shift in chapter 40, and scholars believe that it was a new author who wasn't writing before Babylonian captivity, but actually during the captivity in the 6th century, so during the 500s. And so you have the prophet telling the people about what to do while they're in captivity. So the location for this is Babylon. You're not in Israel anymore. You're not in Jerusalem. You're not a part of the southern tribe. You are in captivity in Babylon. And what is the first line of Isaiah 40? What's the first line? It's actually what we heard sung on Sunday morning. Comfort, comfort, O my people. There's a recognition that this isn't going the way that it should, and yet God is saying through the prophet, comfort, comfort, O my people. And it goes on in verses 3 through 5 to say this: a voice cries out, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, the rough places a plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. In this chapter, Isaiah 40, located in Babylon, the people are told to be comforted, that God has not forgotten them, and that God is up to something. That in the wilderness, they are preparing the way for the Lord to make straight in the desert a highway, that they're going to have every valley be lifted up, every mountain be made low, the uneven ground will become level, the rough places plain. If you are a student of history, you likely recognize some of those lines, not simply because they're in your Bible, but because they were a part of the I Have a Dream speech given by Dr. King. That every mountain and hill will be made low, and the uneven ground shall become level, the rough places plain, and every valley shall be lifted up. The middle of this chapter, chapter 40, so after we comfort, after there's a promise of what God is going to do, there's a reminder of who God is. Do you remember the end of the book of Job, where Job's been complaining and his friends have been complaining about what has happened, and then God shows up and is like, hey, let me remind you who I am. Do you remember who I am? Do you know where snow comes from? Do you know where the billy goat goes? Do you know why the ocean comes this far but no further? Do you know where lightning comes from and strikes? Like all these beautiful imagery of the grandness and the grandeur of who God is in these couple of chapters in Job. Well, we see a reflection of that here in Isaiah 40, because the middle part of the chapter, it's almost like the prophet is God speaking through the prophet is like, hey, I think you forgot how awesome I am. I think you forgot how great I am. I know that what happened was I allowed you to go into captivity. Remember, you for hundreds of years lost the plot. You forgot how to follow me. You literally at one point lost the Torah. You lost the law. You forgot that it even existed. You had to relearn it at one point because it was gone for so long. And you kept going away from me. I think you forgot who I am. And now that you're in captivity, let me remind you of who I am. And then it ends with, hey, But remember, you are in Babylon. I am here to comfort you. Remember who I am, but don't think that strength is yours. Your strength actually comes from me. Your strength comes from me. As I read before, and I'm going to start in verse 29 here, it says, "The Lord gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." The word there for eagles is the Hebrew word nashur, and it does mean eagle. And I love this imagery of an eagle, this soaring, majestic bird that's just beautiful to look at, that nations will literally use as symbols of freedom and excellence and grandeur and victory. We see eagles represented throughout cultures and throughout time because of the majesty of this beautiful bird. And it's fun to imagine that God is inviting people who have been persecuted and put down to mount up on wings like eagles. As Rev sings in the movie, "On eagles, y'all, on eagles," right? And there's this beautiful imagery that in Remember the Titans they have of mounting up on wings like eagles, because they are something much more if they put their strength in the Lord. And it's fun to imagine that victory and majesty and power is going to be ours. But here's the thing about the reality is that it's cool to sing that we're going to mount up on wings like eagles. But when you're in the midst of it, when you're actually going through it, whether you're going through a time of segregation and moving towards integration, or whether it's being in captivity in Israel, or whether it's personally you're just going through a season where you just can't get your bearings and figure it out, and it just feels like you're trampled on left and right, whether it's by the people in your life, the circumstances of your life, whatever it may be. You don't feel like you're mounting up on a wings like eagles. You don't feel like it's all going to be majestic flight and victory and this beautiful, power and privilege that's coming your way. You don't feel like you're a symbol of nations. You probably feel more like a tattered, worn out, cloth blowing in the wind, and you just don't know where you're going to end up because it's not working out for you. One of my favorite scenes in any movie comes from 12 Years a Slave. And it's a scene in the movie where the main character has been, he was living in the North as a free man, and he got captured and brought to the South and forced into slavery, and he can't escape. And while he's working in the cotton fields, one of the other slaves passes away, and they hold a little funeral, and they sing this beautiful song called "Roll, Jordan, Roll." And they sing it over and over: "Roll, Jordan, roll. My soul done rise to heaven, Lord, to see old Jordan roll. My soul done rise to heaven, Lord, to see old Jordan roll." And what's beautiful about this scene is that the group of people around this burial are singing it over and over and over. And our main character can't sing it. He doesn't believe it. Life's been, he's too downtrodden. He's too hurt. He's too hopeless. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe that Jordan will roll. He doesn't believe that my soul will rise to heaven in the year that Jordan rolls. He doesn't accept it. But they keep singing it and singing it and singing it. And then he starts to join in. Because here's the thing. It's not simply that you just believe it's going to happen instantaneously. It's that you have to renew your strength because you trust that God's not done yet. That even if it doesn't happen for you, there's something bigger going on through you and through your effort and through what you're a part of and through the systemic change that you're trying to help make, that something good will come. Because here's the beauty of that idea of roll, Jordan, roll. Jordan is the river that they go from the wilderness into the promised land. Not everybody got to cross it. Moses didn't get to cross it. Some people did, not everyone. An entire generation had to pass away before they could cross into the promised land. And that idea of roll, Jordan, roll is the idea of getting to the promised land. And for people in slavery, it was getting across the Ohio River up into the north. For others, it was imagining the Jordan River being the river of life that you're crossing over from this life into the next and that you're joining God in eternity. And so, however you sang it, whether you sang it as a promise founded in Scripture that you're crossing from the wilderness into the promised land, whether you're crossing from the eternal river into a life with God, or whether you are physically crossing the Ohio River into freedom, you may not be able to sing it passionately yet, but you will one day. Sing, roll, Jordan, roll. Did you know that the word Nashur doesn't just mean eagle? The word Nashur also means vulture. Vulture. You know, those ugly looking birds that are awkward and don't fly very prettily. Prettily, is that a word? They don't fly very well. They are, like I said, like wobbly. You see them just kind of floating around. And then we all know that vultures just eat dead stuff. That's what they do. They eat dead things. And it's actually kind of gross, which is why, whether it's in our media, our stories, whatever it may be, vultures are often not exactly seen as the pinnacle of the bird universe. We usually look at vultures and think, well, that's an ugly looking thing. I don't really want much to do with it. I'd rather see an eagle soaring above. And yet, vultures are actually one of the most important birds in order to have an ecosystem be healthy, because vultures are uniquely designed to eat the things that would cause death and destruction and pestilence in our ecosystem. If you don't have vultures eating carcasses, you are likely to have far more diseases being spread over an ecosystem. Vultures play a significant role. And here's the thing about vultures. Vultures, they are not great flyers. Like I said, if you were to see one, they're kind of awkward and wobbly. But here's the reason why. Vultures rely upon the thermal heat from the earth. The heat from the earth pushes them up into the air, which is why if you were to watch a vulture fly, you would actually see it fly higher on the side of a mountain where there's sunshine than on the other side of the mountain where there's shade. The more heat that is coming thermally from the earth, the higher a vulture will fly, and they will wobble and they will be awkward, but they will rise higher and higher and higher. And the highest recorded bird flight that we know of was 37,000 feet. And the reason we know that was because it was a vulture that was hit by an airplane over Africa. An African vulture, using the thermal heat from the earth, rose to 37,000 feet and then unfortunately got hit by an airplane. That is the highest flight recorded by a bird using the thermal heat, not using its own power, not using its own majesty, not using its own ingenuity, not using its own magnificence or majesty, but using the earth, being in sync with the earth, rising up and looking for death and decay, not so that it can cause more death and decay, so that it can take death and decay into its own body and use the unique acidity of its stomach to kill disease. Using its unique composition to kill death. One of the words that is often used throughout cultures and history for vultures is that they are death eaters. They are death eaters. One of my favorite books that I've ever read, called Consider the Birds by a local author named Debbie Blue, she writes this: I nearly fell off my chair when I discovered that Nashur could be translated as vulture. Isaiah may actually have meant to say that those who wait shall mount up with wings like vultures, not eagles. Faith is more like circling than seizing. It's being lifted by thermals more than flying by the power of our individual wings. I love that quote. Faith is more like circling than seizing. It's being lifted by thermals more than flying by the power of our individual wings. If we are going to be a people that wants to see significant systemic change in our culture, society, in our world, we are going to not rely upon our own power. We can't. We need to rely upon the world, faith, God, one another. We need to be lifted by the thermals and not the power of our own wings. We need to recognize that our job is not to seize control, but is to circle and find ways so that we can consume what is dead to bring about new life. There's a narrative out there when it comes to racial reconciliation. There's a narrative out there that is like, hey, we just need to ignore the past and forget all the atrocities that have happened because things are better now. We just need to let it go. We just need to we don't need to keep bringing it back up. We just keep bringing it back up over and over and over, and it's only making things worse to remember it because people feel bad and they feel guilty and they feel horrible and they're made to feel that way and they don't want to carry around that guilt. But here's the thing. When we ignore and forget what we've been through, we tend to repeat the worst things of our past. I mean, we're doing it right now. We want to ignore and forget that people have been divided racially, and yet that's exactly what we're doing in our society right now with the immigrant community, is that we are dividing people based on the way they look. Now, we might want to say it's where they come from or how they are doing something illegal or whatnot, but really it's a war upon people who look different than the majority culture. We've ignored and tried to forget our past, and now we've succumbed to the same atrocities and the same pain. But justice doesn't ignore and forget. Justice absorbs and transforms. Justice gets proximate. Justice changes the narrative. Justice stays hopeful. Justice does uncomfortable things like a vulture. Justice relies upon a community to say, we aren't done yet. Not, I have all the answers, but we can figure this out. Justice does the uncomfortable work of absorbing what's dead and decaying and says, no, we can't let this fester. We can't let this go. We can't let this go unchecked. We actually have to do something about it, because when we absorb it, when we take it in, we actually have a chance to transform it into something that can be life-giving. When we remove the Death Eaters, when we remove this idea of justice, things get toxic really fast. In India, there was an enzyme given to cows in order to help the cows. But what they didn't know is that after the cows passed away and the vultures came and ate the cows, that this enzyme actually started killing the vultures. It was inherently bad for their systems, and it would shut down certain organs, and they were dying off by the millions. And then after the vultures started dying off by the millions, suddenly disease and pestilence started spreading throughout India. And so the Indian government put into practice safe havens for vultures, and they realized the cause of it, and they stopped using that medicine for the cows or whatever it was, and instead they worked to bring back the vulture population, because we actually need the Death Eaters. We actually need the vultures. We need those that absorb death and decay, and they take it in and transform it into life, and to say this isn't going to exist here anymore. So here's the thing. When it comes to your own personal life, or whether it comes to being a part of the systemic change that's needed in our world today, I want to encourage you to be a vulture. That yes, it's beautiful to be an eagle. It's majestic. It looks good. But be a vulture. Be a Death Eater. Be someone who gets proximate, who does something uncomfortable, who absorbs and transforms. Because that's the calling of Isaiah. That's the calling of God. Let's pray. God, we are grateful for the beautiful work that the prophet does in Isaiah. The reminder that we are to be comforted in the midst of difficult circumstances. to be reminded that you are still up to something, that you are bringing the valleys up and the mountains down and making the rough places smooth. Being reminded of who you are and the power that you have, and that our strength doesn't come from our own brilliance, but it comes from you. And so, God, may we trust that you are still up to something and that you are working through us and in us, and that it's an us, not a me or an I, but a we. May you work through us, and may we be vultures. May we absorb and transform. May we eat death and say, no more will it cause havoc on our watch. May we be a vulture. In the name of Christ, amen. Thank you for listening to this episode of Peace, the podcast. If you would like to learn more about our community, go to peaceumc.com. Again, that's peaceumc.com. For more episodes of this podcast, you can go to our website or go to the show page, peacethepodcast.podbean.com. Again, peacethepodcast.podbean.com. May you experience the love of God, and may you have peace.